Hello everyone, welcome to my video. The book I want to share with you today is called Just for Fun, with the subtitle The Story of an Accidental Revolutionary. I believe most of you have heard of Linux, but many may not know exactly what it is. Simply put, Linux is an open-source operating system mainly used for servers, supercomputers. For example, when you read news on your phone, shop on your computer, it is very likely that you are using software based on the Linux system. It's safe to say that most Internet applications today rely on Linux systems to run. So how exactly was this seemingly magical Linux system created? And what kind of person is its creator? This book, Just for Fun, tells us the story of Linux creator Linus Torvalds in detail. First, let's look at Linus Torvalds' upbringing and background. Torvalds was born in 1969 in Finland to a family of writers and journalists. However, this child born into a literary family had no interest in literature and instead had a great passion for computers from an early age. At the age of 12, Torvalds had his first encounter with computers. From then on, he was obsessed with teaching himself computer programming. To learn programming, he began collecting all kinds of computer magazines and manuals. Torvalds spent a lot of time studying these materials to understand how computers work. He often locked himself in his room programming all day without eating or drinking. While other children were playing outside, Torvalds had already acquired extensive computer knowledge through self-study. His enthusiasm and perseverance for programming laid a solid foundation for his later development of Linux. It's fair to say that Linux's success owes at least half to Torvalds' solid programming skills. So what exactly is the Linux system? And how does it differ from other operating systems we commonly use? Simply put, Linux is a free, open-source operating system. It is developed based on the Unix system and can run on various devices, including servers, desktops, laptops, tablets, etc. Compared with Windows, Linux is more lightweight and has lower requirements for devices. But its performance is very powerful and can handle large websites and complex applications. This is why Internet companies like Google and Facebook choose to build their sites and apps on Linux. Another defining characteristic of Linux is that it uses an open-source model. This means that anyone can get Linux source code for free and modify it as needed. As long as you abide by the open source license, you can develop your own Linux-based operating system. This open philosophy greatly promoted the dissemination and development of the Linux system. It's fair to say that the success of the Linux system is inseparable from the open source model. The open source model allows Linux to be quickly improved and propagated. In turn, the success of Linux has driven the development of the entire open source movement. The two are mutually reinforcing. Since Linux is so successful, how was it born? The development of an operating system usually requires huge resources and manpower. However, when Linus Torvalds developed Linux, he was just a college student. Let's review the birth process of Linux. In 1991, Torvalds, then still a college student, released the first version of the Linux system, Linux 0.01. This early version of Linux was not yet mature and its functionality was limited. But Torvalds didn't give up. Instead, he kept improving the Linux code continuously. In the following months, Torvalds frequently updated the Linux system and released versions 0.02, 0.03, etc. By the end of 1991, Linux was basically usable as an operating system. So how did a college student develop an operating system on his own? Of course, Torvalds' programming talent was important, but more critical was his solid programming skills and tireless perseverance. From the age of 12, Torvalds had acquired extensive programming knowledge through self-study. He had an almost fanatical passion for programming and never gave up easily when encountering problems. It was this passion and perseverance that enabled him to develop the first version of Linux single-handedly. In addition, the rapid maturation of Linux also benefited from the open-source model. After Torvalds open-sourced the code, programmers around the world participated in Linux development. They contributed code, fixed bugs, and accelerated the improvement of Linux. It can be said that the open source model combined with Torvalds' perseverance gave birth to today's Linux. The creation of the Linux system brought Torvalds tremendous fame. But he himself lived a very simple life and was not smug about his achievements. This reflects Torvalds' unique attitude towards life. For Torvalds, programming was just a pleasure and challenge. He developed Linux not for money or fame, but out of personal interest. Torvalds said the joy and sense of accomplishment he feels when a program runs successfully cannot be replaced by any fame or fortune. So when Linux succeeded, Torvalds turned down many high-paying job offers from companies who wanted to hire him. He didn't want Linux to be controlled by any company and was determined to keep its open-source nature. He didn't want to profit from Linux either, hoping instead that it would become a free public resource for anyone to learn from and use. This passion for free technology makes Torvalds the spiritual leader of the entire open-source movement. It's fair to say that Torvalds' life philosophy shaped the unique open-source spirit of Linux. So what exactly is the open-source spirit? Simply put, it refers to the idea that a software's source code is completely open to the public and anyone can use it freely. This idea originated from the free software movement and later evolved into the open source movement. Under the open source model, the design philosophy and basic code of a software are open to the public. This means programmers worldwide can innovate and improve based on this open source code. They can develop their own versions of the software and open source it as well. The Linux system is a typical example of open source software. Anyone can obtain the Linux source code for free and write new Linux versions according to their own needs. As long as you follow the open source license, you can freely use and propagate the Linux system. It is this open and inclusive philosophy that promoted the rapid development of Linux. Countless programmers around the world have developed Linux distributions based on its source code, forming a rich Linux ecosystem. It can be said that the open source model maximally mobilizes human creative potential. It not only spawned Linux and countless great software, but also advanced the entire Internet. The open source spirit has profoundly influenced our lives. As the main founder of the Linux system and the open source movement, Torvalds has profoundly impacted the computer industry and even the whole world. Firstly, in the software field, Linux pioneered open source software. After Linux, open source software blossomed, from operating systems to databases to various application software. Open source software now carries great weight in the Internet world. Secondly, at the ideological level, Torvalds established the model for open source and free software. He advocated that technology should be open and free, not monopolized by individuals or companies. This idea gained widespread and the open source spirit has become the cornerstone of the entire Internet. Lastly, the business model, the emergence of open source software provided a whole new way of doing business. Companies like Red Hat and Canonical successfully operated open source projects and gained considerable profits. This brought new vitality to the IT industry. It's fair to say that without Linus Torvalds, today's Internet would not exist. He not only created a great technological achievement, but also triggered an ideological revolution. For this reason, when Time magazine selected the most influential people of the 20th century in 2004, Linus Torvalds was on the list. As a revolutionary in the field of programming, his name will be forever recorded in the history of technological development. That's all for today. The book Just for Fun gave us a comprehensive account of Torvalds' upbringing, Linux's birth, and the rise of the open source spirit. If you want to gain deeper insight into the history of the computer industry or are interested in open source culture, this book is well worth reading. Thank you for watching. See you next time.